Hello and welcome to this special AutoVista Group video. Joining me today via video conference is Transport and Environment e-mobility manager Saul Lopez.
Hi, good morning. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. In today's video, we hope to shed some light on some of the recent developments in the world of e-mobility. Saul, a recent report by the International Energy Agency revealed the global number of publicly accessible chargers increased by 60% in 2019. This was higher than the electric light-duty vehicle stock growth. How important is it that infrastructure growth precedes the uptake of electric vehicles?
Yes, this is the typical chicken and egg situation, isn't it? It it doesn't have an easy answer. Very often, what we see is that there is indeed a lack of public charging infrastructure, and this can act as a bottleneck, or at least it can be perceived as a bottleneck by people who, they need that reassurance. They need to be walking in the street and see something available before they start even considering switching to an electric vehicle. But when you analyze the figures, at least for the European market, you realize that 90% of charging of electric vehicles is done at home overnight. And when you check the situation in cities, you see that there's already millions of potential customers that could be buying electric vehicles because they live in a place that's probably a house and they have their own garage and they have a plug in there already. So they could be already using that charging infrastructure, because very often people don't see a plug in the garage as charging infrastructure. They think of a more professional, specific wall box designed to charge electric vehicles. But actually, a standard outlet is just a charge point for an electric vehicle as well. So there are millions of those out there. And it's more a matter of perception. And this has been, unfortunately, it has been used by the automotive industry in Europe as a pretext, as an excuse, not to push more, not to push more for EV production and EV sales in the past. Now this is changing, of course, because since January 1st, 2020, the EU car CO2 regulation standards kicked in, and now they have to sell a specific amount of EVs, otherwise they will have to face fines. But up until 2020, this was the typical excuse by car makers. Oh no, there's no demand and there's a huge bottleneck with the charging infrastructure, so that's why we don't sell and we don't produce many EVs. But at TNE, we have made an analysis and we published reports to show people this. And we found that there's a specific ratio, which is one charging point per 10 electric vehicles, that's like the sweet spot. That's where everything fits and everything works fine. And up until 2020, we were above that ratio, meaning there were more charging points that 1 to 10 ratio that I'm mentioning here. Now, from 2020 onwards, the situation will change because the EV sales they're picking up. They were even booming in the last quarter of 2019 and first quarter of 2020 before the COVID crunch. So now we definitely will need more charging infrastructure. And we are looking forward at the Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure Directive revision that will be happening, and it's actually starting already at EU level, where we will be working to try to adapt that directive to the modern times, as you call it.
Talking about chargers and charging types, the report outlined that 52% of publicly accessible slow chargers, that's up to 22 kilowatts, and 82% of fast chargers were rolled out in China, so a huge majority. Meanwhile, countries in Europe struggled to get above 5%. Do you think there was a reason for this?
Yes, and I just mentioned, actually, because that's the main reason, the Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure Directive. It was not really fit for purpose, because the public chargers deployment plan that it had, that it had in the previous version, only analyzed the period going up until 2020. So now the revision is going on. We expect about 3 million public chargers to pop up from today until 2030, in the next decade. That will help to close the gap. Another thing that would be important is that the EU raises the level or the category from directive to regulation. It will also help, because then, administratively speaking, it will be compulsory to put in place the public chargers. It's not just a recommendation with then lots of loopholes that states that want to be lagging behind can use. And also, we can use the EU Recovery Fund because member states can then elaborate plans on how to spend the EU recovery money. And that can be used for the deployment of charging infrastructure for both cars and trucks, by the way, because very often we talk only about passenger vehicles or light commercial vans. But trucks also need a fast and big deployment of public charging infrastructure. And let me please also underline here, it's very important because all these investments, all this push towards electrification of transport also means an industrial opportunity for Europe and jobs. It's going to translate directly into creating jobs, which is something that Europe will need. So the revision of the Alternative Fuels and Infrastructure Directive, which is happening now, should give Europe 3 million charging points by 2030, which will bring jobs. So that is what we should focus on now.
On a more local level, Spain recently revealed plans to increase its budget to support EVs from 65 million euros to 100 million euros. This is going to include a 4,000 euro scrappage bonus. Will incentives like this be enough to turn the tide of demand towards less polluting vehicles?
Yeah, well, in Spain, the plan that was revealed is a good step in the right direction, but it's a bit shy, especially when you compare it to the plans that were put in place recently by France and Germany. If we look at those figures, you see that, yes, on the one hand, they increased the budget to accelerate the transition to electric vehicles from 65 million euros to 100, which is very good. But at the same time, they are assigning 250 million euros to fleet renewal. And that includes diesels, gasoline-powered cars, hybrids. So that includes SUVs because they have set a threshold of 120 grams in the old NEDC cycle, which translates into about 140 something grams per kilometer driven in the new WLTP cycle, which means very polluting cars. They're all included. And they've got 250 millions for that, while we have only 100 million euros for the EVs. So yes, 100 million euros is better than 65 that were previously assigned, but it's still, you still see 2.5 times more money going to fleet renewable, which includes gasoline and diesel and SUVs and hybrids, 2.5 times more to that than to the electric vehicles. So yes, it's a good step in the right direction, but it's a small step. It's shy. They can be more ambitious, and actually you can see when you compare the reactions of automakers in Germany and France to those of the automakers and the lobby of automakers in Spain, you see that in Spain they're happy, in Germany they're complaining. So you see the difference.
So you mentioned France and Germany there. Do you think that there's a gold standard for how particular countries in Europe are trying to bounce back after COVID-19 in terms of electric mobility?
Well, the standard here should be no public money, no taxpayers' money subsidizing polluting internal combustion engine vehicles. That should be the rule. And why is this? Of course, there are environmental reasons. Global warming, climate change, greenhouse gases, we must stop that immediately. So financing vehicles that emit greenhouse gases, it's a no. Then there's also, of course, the air quality problem, the health issue. If you live in a city and you have millions of vehicles that emit toxic particles in the air you breathe, clearly not good. I mean, people die from this. There are figures that measure this. There's hundreds of thousands of deaths every year in Europe because of the poor air quality. And transport, vehicles in particular, are responsible in a huge part for this. So that's also a reason why we should not subsidize these vehicles. And then there's the industrial opportunity that I mentioned earlier, boosting the production and the infrastructure necessary for, to switch to electric mobility in Europe. And this is not only for cars, of course, it's also trucks, it's trains, it's all, the whole transport sector. And also, last but not least, again, the car CO2 regulations that kicked in January 2020. car makers are facing potential billions of euros, potential fines, billions of euros in fines if they don't meet the CO2 levels that have been set. And that was, they were agreed a decade ago. They knew from 2009 that they were going to have to limit their CO2 emissions to a certain level. So why do we use public money to subsidize sales of polluting vehicles that will then lead car makers to face fines? We're putting public taxpayers' public money into the hands of car makers, and then because of that, they will have to pay fines. This is nonsense. So those are the main reasons why we should stop doing that.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today. So, Sol, thank you very much for taking so much time to speak with us this morning.
You're welcome.
And of course, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel on YouTube. You can get all the latest AutoVista Group videos. You can also sign up to the Daily Brief email at autovistagroup.com/sign up. Follow us on Twitter as well at autovista_group and connect with us on LinkedIn. Thanks very much for watching. We'll catch you next time.